Hello, and welcome to the Under Budget Outdoors podcast, a podcast for new, intermediate, and seasoned hunters across the world. A podcast about experience, gear, knowledge, and more. Whether you hunt with a bow, crossbow, rifle, or shotgun, you can hunt properly and efficiently while being under budget. Just remember, it doesn't take big bucks to kill big bucks. Let's get right into it. Intro.
All right, hey guys, welcome back. Episode 5. Brock, PJ, and myself. Welcome to Under Budget Outdoors. Click like, subscribe, share to help us out. And the majority of this, just like all the other episodes, is going to be done by Brock. And we are.
He's the knowledge guy.
Yeah, we're going to be going over how deer communicate. And they don't say English words, so I'm out of this.
Well, even there, half the time I think those words you still struggle. So
yeah, no kidding.
Unfortunately, they don't speak English, but I mean, you know, it could be worse.
But all right, so I guess I'm pretty much going to be spearheading this one, as Nate said. So understanding how deer communicate themselves is really going to help you in understanding your in-season scouting, which is going to kind of play part in when you're approaching the rut, which we'll do a completely separate episode on that. But this episode is kind of going to be broken up into 2 parts later this summer. Like I was just talking with these guys about off record. We're going to have a guy come on to talk about scrapes, mock scrapes, and go a lot deeper into that topic. So this is kind of going to lay the foundation so you can understand what it is that the deer use to communicate, how they use it. Since these guys don't really know too much about it, PJ, I sent you that picture that I was going to have you go for a visual. That's kind of showing the different glands that a deer have. They have 7 total. We're pretty much going to talk about 4 of them for the most part that they use to communicate with. The main ones that we're going to be talking about is the tarsal gland, the preorbital gland, the interdigital gland, and the forehead gland. The nasal gland is obviously going to play a big part when it comes to hunting because deer have a very keen sense of smell. But when it comes to the communication side of it, the 4 main ones are the ones that we really want to touch on. The interdigital gland is located down in between their hooves or their toes, I guess you can say. So if you look at a deer's hoof right in front of you, you split the hooves apart, you can see that gland in there. That gland, every time that deer steps and they're walking, or if they're at a scrape, they're scraping the ground, they're laying that scent down. And a really good way to understand how that gland kind of works, say you're sitting in a tree stand and a deer walks through, 20 minutes later, another deer walks through that exact same path. It's almost like they're in the exact same footprints as the one before it. That's because that deer that came in second is smelling that interdigital scent from that gland from that first deer. You know, same thing goes for a really big misconception with tracking dogs is tracking dogs go after the scent from the blood. They're actually following the scent from that interdigital gland.
Okay.
That's why the dogs are able to that's why they're able to track down that deer. Even if you don't have a blood trail or anything, they're still able to follow exactly where that deer went because they're able to chase that scent that's laid down from that. When they're in the scrapes, the scrapes are used by bucks and does. It's not just strictly for bucks. And then also they're all year long. A lot of times you're going to see more scrape activity during the rut or in the pre-rut, but they are used all year long. They're visited by deer all year long. So every time that they go to that scrape and they're hitting that ground, they're laying that scent down, letting the other deer know that they've been in there.
Right.
All right. The forehead and the preorbital gland. Forehead, obviously, it's located in the forehead up above. The preorbital is kind of like in the corner of the eye, down close to the nose. So like if you think like when you're getting tired and you get like all those crusties and like that in there,
Right.
that's pretty much where that gland is located at. Those are going to be mainly used on the what they call the licking branches. So anytime that you see a scrape, there's always going to be something above that scrape, like a low-hanging branch. When you're doing a mock scrape, if you can hang a fake branch or a piece of hemp rope, something like that, which in the second episode we'll get a lot deeper into that. Anytime that you see that deer kind of like poke its head up and it's starting to put its head up against that rope or that branch or whatever, they're laying that scent from the preorbital and also the forehead gland. So that way, again, another deer comes in, they know that they've been there. The tarsal gland is located, if you think about it, kind of like the knee, like the back legs, the hind legs. That's where that's located at. And that is kind of, if you really think about it, the thumbprint of a deer. Every deer has its own specific scent to each individual deer. No two deer are going to smell the same pretty much. A really big misconception with the tarsal gland is that it's the urine that causes that scent. What actually causes that scent is when the urine, so it's called rub urination. If you've ever seen a deer squat down and when it's peeing and it's rubbing its back legs together, it's getting that urine down inside that gland, that special area, and there's special hairs back there that hold bacteria. When that urine kind of soaks into that and sits there, it creates bacteria, and that bacteria is what creates that scent.
Huh. Okay.
So when you see a deer, like if a buck is up behind a doe and it's going in and it's sniffing those back legs, that's what that buck is going for. It's finding that scent from that tarsal gland. Do you guys what do you guys have you guys seen any scrapes in the woods? Have you noticed any of this kind of activity?
Yeah, I've seen scrapes, right? So my question is, right, not knowing anything about this, how does that help me when I'm like, besides scrapes, obviously, because that's pretty obvious. How does that help me out in the woods when I'm scouting or when I'm trying to find a place to
So
post up?
when you get into the pre-rut and those bucks are starting to starting to get out of summer into fall, like that mid-October area, like right before the bucks start getting up and chasing a lot. Most of the time, I would say probably 95 to 99% of the time, your mature older bucks are going to break off and leave before the rest of the bucks do. Your younger bucks are going to kind of hold together a little bit more because in the summer and the early season, you'll have what they call bachelor groups. They'll just be a pack of 5, 6, 10 bucks that are all kind of just hanging out together all the time. Once it starts getting into that breeding season, they're all going to start breaking off, and they're going to kind of pick an area this is my area. So when they're laying that scent down, the tarsal gland, when they're getting that scent, the forehead gland and the preorbital, when they're making their rubs or they're up on those licking branches, they're leaving their scent there saying, this is my area, pretty much stay out of it type thing. Right. So when you start seeing more scrapes pop up, because like I said, their scrapes are all year long, but they're going to have the most activity around that rut time. When you start seeing new scrapes pop up and you're doing your in-season scouting, you can set up on that, kind of get an idea of where that deer is coming in from, what side, because a lot of the times that buck is going to be going back there very frequently to check on that scrape. Because
Okay.
when the does are going to come into the scrapes and they're going to leave their scent in that scrape, and they're pretty much, before they go into estrus, they're going to come there to say, hey, I'm here, but I'm not ready to breed yet. That buck's going to come back. They're going to check that scrape. They're going to get that scent and be like, okay, the doe is here. They're going to go out. They're going to start chasing. They're going to start checking scents on everything. But once that doe comes in and lays the scent down and says, I'm in estrus, I'm ready to go, that buck is going to know that. So a lot of the times when these bucks are coming in and checking those scrapes, if you set up correctly, if you scout everything out right, you follow the wind direction and all that, you can harvest that buck when he's coming in there and try to catch him off his game. A lot of times when the bucks come in to check those scrapes, sometimes they won't come all the way into the scrape. They'll stay, 30, 40, 50 yards away from it, but they're going to come in from the downwind side of it, and they're still going to be able to pick up that scent from that scrape. So like we said in, I believe it was episode 2, if you find a scrape, don't set up right on top of that scrape.
Right.
Give yourself some time or some distance from that scrape, because if that buck's coming in, you might be able to see him 30 yards away, checking that scrape, getting that scent from it downwind. But if you don't have a shot opportunity, you're just going to watch that buck walk.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
That makes
So
sense.
like, they're constantly going to come back and check it, but they're not always going to go right to that scrape.
Right.
Okay. So really, for us, we're looking for scrapes and rubs, more or less.
Right. So last year when we went through finding your deer and we found that massive rub line, that line, we know that was pretty much one solid buck that was going all the way across that entire ridge. That's pretty much his dominant area where he is. My dad and another guy that hunts up there had him on camera, and they saw him, but it was always when they were working on the farm and not in the woods.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, when we went out into the woods, he was either somewhere else, or whoever was hunting didn't go in the right direction, or whatever the case, and the buck, snorted him out, and that was it. But that was pretty much his dominant area where he was at. Over like that stand that you were sitting in, Nate,
Yeah.
I would say if like over kind of where your deer headed down towards in that little valley going out that creek to the other property,
Right.
that's a pretty big bedding area that's pretty consistent every year with those deer. So that buck is more than likely coming out of there, going out across that ridge, and then turning around and coming right back. Or he'll head up to the fields and eat whatever leftover corn is laid out there after the harvest season, and then going right back in.
I know where I'm going this year.
If I'm not there first.
Yeah.
So I remember hearing when I was listening to the in-season podcast when they were talking about scrapes and the glands and everything like that. I don't remember the guy's name, but the guy that was on there was saying that, like, it was always one of those things, like, if you have to use the restroom, like, don't pee anywhere near your stand. However, he was saying that they still come back. Like, I guess there was some guy that went and urinated on like 4 or 5 different scrapes, and those bucks were still checking it every day. Like, it didn't scare them away at all.
So I've heard that too, yeah.
So there's been studies done, pretty much like, how do I put this? Like your specific scent, like my scent when I pee, that specific scent only lasts for anywhere from 15 minutes to maybe 2 hours at most. After that, it's just urine at that point.
Right.
And the deer can't signify if it's human, deer, bear, coyote, whatever. After that very short, small time frame, they have no idea what it is.
Yeah, they just smell the urine and then the bacteria and whatnot.
It's just urine at that point, and that's all it is. And that's where the glands for the deer come in, the tarsal gland, the preorbital gland, the forehead gland, leaving that specific scent. That's where those come in, that they're able to communicate with each other and knowing that it is, a deer that's in there and it's not something else that's going to spook them out.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And then also that's where the specialized hairs on the tarsal gland come in, creating that bacteria, which is what actually creates the scent from it.
Right.
That, like I said, that's pretty much, you can think of that as like the thumbprint of a deer. Every deer is going to have their own specific special scent that comes from that tarsal gland.
Is there any scent or gland that the deer use the most, or they all kind of play a part in?
It's in my opinion, I would say it's going to depend on the year. I'm not going to say that I know anything and everything about this kind of stuff, which is kind of. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the guy that I'm talking about, I'm pretty sure he said the tarsal gland is definitely the primary.
That's like the dominant one that I would say.
Yeah, because he was saying you'll see like a buck come up and smell the tarsal glands on a doe, and then he knows exactly which doe that is.
Right. Yeah. So if that scent was left in the scrape that he's checking,
right.
and then all of a sudden he goes out, smells that doe, and he matches that scent pretty much, because the does are always going to try to find the most dominant bucks to breed with.
Right.
They're not the does aren't just going out and just finding any buck to breed with. They always want that dominant buck.
Right.
So they need to leave their scent where those dominant bucks are typically at, which is a scrape line or their bedding area, whatever the case.
Gotcha.
So that way that buck can then breed with that doe, and if you get lucky enough, spread some good genetics,
Yeah.
and you have yourself a good herd.
Gotcha.
So in other words, Nate,
Mm.
the doe wouldn't pick you.
You kidding me?
All right.
Yeah. But
I mean,
dude, like I don't even know what questions to ask because I know nothing about this.
it's definitely a very fine topic, right? Like there's
So what about scents? Like, is there specific scents that I should use? Like everyone uses like, what is it? The autumn blend, no scent spray bottle stuff. Like, is there any scent
that's like a whole different topic, but like, all right, I know one of the most common lures is
lures. That's it.
Is what do you call it? The estrus, right? You see that in Walmart with the little white like felt things that you dip in the estrus and then you hang it on a tree, and the bucks are supposed to come and smell it and you drop them. I was told by multiple people that you have to use those at the exact right time. You can't just use them any time of the year, because then the bucks are going to say, what the hell is going on? Why are these does making this smell in the wrong time of the season?
Yeah, and another big thing to think about when it comes into scents that like luring deer, one, some states it's illegal.
Correct.
So again,
it's
that
essentially
goes back to the previous
baiting,
episode of going, checking your local laws and regulations on if you're legally allowed to use that stuff. But also, one, like PJ said, making sure that you're using the right scent the right time of year.
Also callers too.
And then also, it's been found, and this is one of those topics that is kind of like the fixed head, mechanical broadhead type argument. Some people will say, one or the other. My opinion, urine-based scents don't work, because like I was just saying, within 15-20 minutes they can't tell the difference between if it's a deer, a bear, a coyote, a human. They have no idea. It's just urine at that point. So if you use a gland-based scent, it's going to be a lot better for you to use those scents to draw that deer in and to keep them coming in and not spook them out with some crazy scent. Like you don't want to use an estrus scent the first week of archery, because those deer are in estrus. The best thing to, if you do want to use an estrus scent, the best thing to do is just sit in the woods, be hunting, and wait until you're seeing the breeding activity happen, because then for sure, okay, here it is. I'm now in the breeding season. I can start using this scent. Or you can go back to what we were saying in one of the other episodes. If you have your trail cameras out and you're starting to see those fawns drop and pop up in the springtime, count back that 200 days for the gestation period and narrow down and know exactly when the breeding season is going on. And you can kind of use that to maybe kind of spearhead the breeding season a little bit to get those bucks up and moving and get them to come in.
Oh, that's smart. I didn't even, every time I would see a fawn, I'm like, oh, that's a deer that made it through another season.
Yeah, but I mean, that goes into the whole, this all ties in together. It all goes into the scouting thing. If you're scouting on your couch, you're able to have the cell camera out there and get pictures right to your phone. That's a form of scouting. You're knowing when those deer are coming through, what time, all that, but you're also finding out when those does are starting to have those fawns drop, and then you can back that up, find out when the actual peak of rut is happening, and use that to your advantage for the season after that, and everything. And you can even do that a couple years in a row and really narrow down. Like everyone says, like, oh, these 2 weeks is when rut happens or when you need to be in the woods. You get 3, 4, or 5 years of that data put together. You can narrow down yourself for your area. Okay, here you go. These 2 weeks are my prime weeks of when they're starting to breed.
That's pretty easy to figure out. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to like understanding how deer communicate, and I guess you can say becoming good at understanding it, is just going to come from experience. Being out in the woods, watching deer, understanding deer, seeing how they change, each year. If you get enough time to go out, say from middle of October to the end of November, seeing how they're changing through that time, like through that pre-rut into the chasing, into the breeding and all that, and just see how the deer are acting different, what kind of areas they go to different times a year. That's going to be the easiest way to understand a lot of this. It's just from the time and experience.
well, that's something that I plan on, gathering over the years. Got 2 years now, so this year will be number 3. So time will tell.
There you go.
For sure.
And when you're out there, if you're doing in-season scouting, which again, we'll do another topic on that to really get into that. But when you're doing your in-season scouting and you're starting to see new scrapes pop up, or if there's a scrape, like scrapes they'll last for years. They'll be going back to the same scrape year after year for like 3, 4, or 5 years in a row.
That's just incredible to me too. Like with all the changes of seasons and everything, and they still use the exact same spot.
Yeah. So if you happen to have an area that, say, it's not easy to access, or you can't really find a good spot to set a stand up, or you just want those deer in a different area, you can actually eliminate that scrape and make them go somewhere else. And the best way to do that would be to get rid of the licking branch. If there's a natural branch or tree limb, vine, something like that they're using above that scrape, knock it out. Just get rid of it. As soon as you do that, that scrape is dead. They're going to create another scrape somewhere. And if you get into doing the mock scrapes, which we'll talk about in the second part of this, you can essentially put those deer where you want them. Just because you make one scrape doesn't mean, okay, the deer are going to be here and I'm going to harvest a buck now. You still have to plan it out, scout it out, understand how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and all that, which I think is going to really help with having an actual company that makes the scrape sense and stuff like that come on and kind of explain it,
Right.
to really get more deeper into it, which is why we wanted to kind of lay this foundation out now. So that way, when he comes on and he's talking about it, there's an understanding of what he's talking about, because you can hear somebody talk all day long, but if you don't know what he's talking about or what he's saying, it's going to go in one ear and out the other.
Absolutely.
Right.
But it is possible to eliminate scrapes and get them out of that area and move them over to an area where you want them to be, where you have easier access. You're able to set up a stand. You're able to have multiple ingress and egress to get into that stand to play the wind and use that to your advantage. So then you can have a better shot of harvesting that buck, or harvesting a buck year after year, if that's what you're trying to go for.
Some of this is like just crazy to follow along with. You know what I mean? Like if you really exactly, like I'm trying to even stick along and I'm like, I got a lot of research to do. It's insane with just how intricate all of it is.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're trying to, like, if you're trying to get into the point of, I want to harvest a buck every year, like that's your go-to, there's a lot to learn about a lot of different things. You got to learn the difference, like I said, from early season to the pre-rut to the rut to the late season. They're going to change all year long. The bedding areas are going to change. Their what they eat, where they eat is all going to change. There's a lot to learn, and you can go so deep into a lot of these different topics and still not learn everything and still not understand everything until you get out in the woods year after year and start to pick up on this stuff from your own experience.
Yeah, I mean, one, I've never really put two and two together, right? I would see a scrape, I would see a rub, a bedding area, I'd be like, oh, all right, I'm doing something right, like the deer have been in this area. Now, whenever I go back, the deer are never in that area, but this is a lot to.
It's another thing, like we were saying with ladder stand placement. Like, you don't also want to put it right on a scrape or right next to a scrape. You know what I mean? Like, even though like you see the scrape, yeah, you're in the area, but you don't want to be like, all right, this is where I'm going.
I mean, yeah, my first year, definitely guilty of that. Like, oh, I
We
see a
all
scrape.
are. I'm like,
I'm gonna,
look, here's a path, tree stand.
Yeah, I'm gonna post up right here. I'm gonna put this log right here so my back don't hurt, and then this deer is gonna be dumb and stupid and walk right into my barrel. And
I'm gonna put my feet where they walk.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, that way they'll see me and they'll know that it's me that's shooting them.
Just come on
yeah,
down.
like I'm at the, I'm all camered up. The
Sit
deer
down,
can't
have a
see
beer.
me.
Yeah, let's not mix alcohol and hunting at the same time. But
you sure you don't want to?
Well, I mean, if you're back at the lodge or back at your house, but while you're sitting there with the weapon in your hand, let's not condone that,
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't even know, like I said, what questions to ask. I guess when when your buddy comes on, really pick his brain with all this about like scrapes and all that. And
yeah, that would be the best thing to do. But like, even going back to like what PJ was saying, when if you're using like an extra scent, obviously, like we said, make sure it's the right time to use it. But you also don't want to be putting like a gallon of that stuff out there, because that's like when you're making scrapes, when you're trying to do scents or lures or anything of that sort, you're trying to make it natural to bring that deer in. If you're going to be going, when a deer goes out and urinates somewhere, they're not leaving a gallon and a half of urine on the ground.
Right.
You need to use just a little bit of it here and there. And then, also don't do it exactly where your stand location is. Let it off, because I've seen a couple of guys, they'll do like the drag lines, they'll hook it to their bootleg and have the extras like kind of drag behind them to like cover their scent or whatever. Well, next thing you know, that scent is right up to the base of the tree that you're sitting in, or right up to the door to the blind that you're sitting in.
Right.
And if that deer is coming in from a different area, picks up that scent, and all of a sudden that deer is directly below you or 2 foot from your blind, what are you going to do at that point?
So I would say, right, when I first used, I mean, granted, 2 years, I was like a young teenager with cologne. When he first gets cologne, he just douses himself with it. And that's, my first year, I was like, all right, the more scent, the stronger it's going to be, the more deer are going to come in. And
I mean, that's kind of how it was when I set up at Hagedorn too. These deer had not, been around people in God knows how long, and then somebody shows up and dumps half a bag of corn and throws out a bag of apples and a salt lick block and half a jar of molasses, and I'm like, oh, this is a buffet. Almost said a non-YouTube friendly word there. This is a buffet here. This is going to be great. And, now knowing, it's like, oh, those deer were probably like, what in the hell is going on over there? Smells great, but I'm not going there. Except the two dumb ones that did.
Trying to set up a golden corral for deer is it's not going to work out too well for you. It's going to take them a while to get used to that kind of stuff.
I could understand why people do it.
Yeah,
we all did it. We all did it before we knew.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I would be guilty if I was walking through the woods and then all of a sudden there was a golden corral sitting there. I'd be like, hell yeah. But that's That's me.
Yeah, I mean, I love myself some nice golden corral every once in a while.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you talked about getting rid of that scrapes. So when I was in the woods, like a few times, I would see branches cut, and that would make a lot of sense why people cut them down to try to push the deer in the direction that they want to. I just thought it was to hide the deer, but if they're trying to push them where they want them, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I mean, if like I said, if that scrape is a really active scrape and it's in an area where, like I said, you just purely don't want them, or like let's say in PJ's case where he's up at his family's hunting cabin, where his stand is, he can see pretty much the property line right where he's at. They got a scrape going on right there. Eliminate that scrape and try to draw them further into the property, so that way when you do have the chance to harvest that buck, it's not going to just turn around and go right out to
Right.
that neighbor's, and you're not going to be able to actually recover that buck. You know, if it's in an area like on the farm, let's say there's a scrape that's like really active, but it's right down next to the creek. I'm not going to want them to be down in that area because I still need to worry about getting that deer out of the woods.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys have both seen the hills that we have to climb to get them up out of there. I would rather get that deer up top a little bit on top of that ridge and maybe try to keep them up there,
For
so that way
sure.
when I do have the chance to harvest something, it's easier for me to get it out of the woods and
Absolutely.
go home and have some good dinner.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
But there's a lot of different things that go into it. Like I said, if there's an area that you don't have adequate locations for putting a stand, or if it's something that's just really hard to access to get in and to hunt it, if it's going through the other side or the other side of like a thick bedding cover or something, and it's just not easy to access, try to get them onto the other side of it, and using the mock scrapes that we'll learn about later, and use that to your advantage. Because even when you're setting up a mock scrape, you can pretty much do it anywhere. And if there's not a licking branch above it, you can create a licking branch. You can cut a limb off of something else, screw it onto that tree. There's actually things that are made that screw onto the tree. It's almost like if you put a flag outside your house and the limb just sits right down inside of it, and it creates that branch that
Yeah,
they're
like a
going to use
bracket
for that.
almost.
Yeah. So I mean, like, just because you don't have the licking branch available to you, you can always make one. Or a lot of people have lately have really gotten into the hemp ropes and hanging that over top of it and putting the scent on the hemp ropes. You get a preorbital based scent, put that on there. Those deer are going to start using that and start coming into it. And like PJ was saying, the guy goes out, makes a scrape and pees in it himself. Within 6 hours to a day, those deer are coming in, they're using that scrape.
Right.
It could happen that quick.
So how do you do so with public land, right? I'm sure everyone and their brother uses scents and all that stuff. How do you know, I guess, how much to use if you're in public land? If I'm
Well, the first thing on that is checking your local laws and regulations on if you
right, of
can.
course.
A lot of public lands, you can't use any scent whatsoever. If you're able to, again, like I said, you want to use a real small amount of it. But if you're on public land, you can also just let the deer freshen up that scrape every time they come in, and just completely stay out of there yourself. Find out where you want to set your stand up at, where your ingress and egress is going to be, so you're able to play the wind direction, and just hunt that scrape. Just let the deer themselves dictate when and how they want to freshen up that scrape whenever they come in.
Huh. Okay. This is
If
gonna
you're
be the year.
if you're on private land, you obviously have more of the ability to control, I guess you can say, the scrape and how it's used and when it's used. But even there, just because you're on private land, if you're in a state that it's illegal to use that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
you still don't have that ability.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, shoot. I mean, I don't have any more questions until I'm out there and I forget all this and I use a gallon of Adobe.
It's the only thing you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
start,
mean,
getting the shakes, you know.
well, I have a question. So, and I know we're gonna get on the mock scrapes later, but when would you start? Like, let's say, okay, like you gave the example of being on my property with the property line right there. When would you move that scrape? When would you want to try to eliminate the deer made scrape and make a mock scrape? Would you do that anytime? Would you do it, prior to the season, mid season?
In
What do
my
you think?
opinion, I would like to do it out of season. So that way it gives myself a chance to set it up, get everything right, get the stand location set up, get your shooting lanes put in, whole
Right.
nine. So that way, come time for the actual season to open, you're not going in there and messing around and making all that noise, leaving your scent all around the woods. And then as the season progresses and it gets into that pre-rut and that rut, as long as you do everything correctly, you get the right scents in there at the right time and everything, that should come natural to the deer. Because like I said, scrapes are all year long. You can do it, while in season, like the end of September, early October. And I'm sure that the guy that's going to come on for the second part of this for the mock scrapes will have a completely different opinion than me on it, which is fine. I mean, everyone is going to have their own opinions on everything that they can do, and we can definitely ask him when he would set that kind of stuff up or what would be the best time of year to do it, and also get into what types of scents would be good for each time of year if you're trying to freshen it up, how often we should freshen it up and not let the deer themselves just kind of dictate when it gets fresh and all that. But I would personally try to set up the best I can off season, while if I walk through the woods and I blow a deer out, it's not really going to hurt me too much because there's going to be enough time for them to kind of reset themselves and get back in that area.
No, all right then.
Yeah, makes sense. All right.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good point to end off until your
Yeah.
homeboy comes in.
So next week, Nate, do you want to touch on a little bit of what we're gonna do next week?
Yeah, so next week, hopefully, if everything lines up, we all have lives and jobs and all that. But I have a cousin who's been bow hunting for 30, 40 years, probably closer to 30, and he's gonna get more into the weeds about arrows and archery hunting and just more knowledge and a different point of view. I know Brock's been hunting since he was probably 10, but this is just another point of view, just like with everything else. There's more than one way to skin a deer.
Right.
So hopefully if everything lines up, he'll be able to join us and talk about, arrows and, different types of broadheads and expandable heads. And yeah, I talked to him early today and he blew my mind with half the stuff. I had to, stop him and be like, all right, save all this, talk about it on Friday.
Yeah, and that is that's going to go into kind of like this topic that we did tonight. That's going to be kind of split up into two parts. Like one is just kind of again going to lay the foundation, understanding your weapon, your understanding your bow, the parts of it, how to set it up, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll do a separate episode on just arrows themselves, because
sure.
those are topics that you can get really deep into. And
Yep.
I know for myself, I'm not going to want to sit there and listen to a podcast or watch a YouTube video for 3 hours on one topic.
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be easier to break it up into segments and make it easier that way to listen. So
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what's coming up next couple weeks. And hey, just like, subscribe, share, comment, all that, and it don't take big bucks to kill big bucks.
Alrighty, y'all. We'll see you next week. Thank you.